A historic day in the United States as former President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to 34 felony counts, making him the first U.S. president in history to face a criminal trial. And in a historic shift, Finland joins NATO, triggered by the war in Ukraine, prompting anger in Russia, where officials have cast the move as a threat. This is AL24 News Special. On Tuesday, former President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to more than 30 felony counts over hush money case related to his presidential campaign in 2016, according to law officials. The former president left New York for Florida, where he's expected to deliver a speech on Tuesday evening. Here's Islam Said.
U.S. former President Donald Trump on Tuesday pleaded not guilty before a judge to 34 felonies of falsifying business record after he faced a grand jury indictment arising from fraud case and violating other election laws during his 2016 presidential campaign.
We today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State.
Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country. Because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
Moments before his arraignment, his supporters rallied outside the New York court, whistling, shouting, and raising posters in support of the former president.
Trump has done so much for our country during the 4 years. So that's why, and I support him, and I want to show my support. I want to protest this brag bro that there's a ridiculous case. It was not a case at all. They just try to pick up a little bit of things and to accuse Trump and stop him to run 2024.
Trump has already announced his candidacy for president in 2024. Just a couple of days before his arraignment, Trump posted a video on Truth Social asking his supporters to contribute money for his 2024 campaign. It is a turning point for the United States as Trump is set to become the first U.S. president to be charged with such crime. The charges together have a potential punishment for more than 100 years in jail under New York law. However, the actual prison term, if he's found guilty at trial, would almost definitely be much lower. Trump left Manhattan courthouse and headed to LaGuardia Airport. According to officials, he was due to return to Florida and deliver remarks from his Mar-a-Lago resort on Tuesday evening.
And in the first chapter of today's special, we will be talking to Mark Lowe, expert on international relations from Genoa, Italy, and Mr. Adam Roosevelt, national security expert, foreign affairs and political analyst, military strategist from Washington. He's currently based at Dubai. And Mr. Dennis Speed, political analyst, founding member of Scheller Institute from New Jersey. Gentlemen, thank you for agreeing to be with us. Let's start with you, Mr. Mark Lowe. Donald Trump is the first ex-president ever to face criminal charges, and it's true that this might take a while, but what are we to expect to unfold in this case? He already pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, but what is next, according to you?
Well, I think in a scenario where logic has been thrown completely to the wind, this could actually be to Donald Trump's advantage. As he has already claimed, this, according to Trump and according to Trump's lawyers, is a politicized case. This is a scenario where the institutions have ganged up against the former president. So in reality, and taking into consideration Trump's electoral base, what we are looking at is a scenario that potentially could be beneficial to his candidacy next year. So it will be very, very interesting to watch and follow how all of this develops. Now, if I am not wrong, the next installment, if you like, will not be until December of this year, so shortly before the official candidacies will be launched. So Trump has a good few months in front of him to make a gain from something that, in a normal world, would be something that would end any politician's career.
Very nice indeed. And Mr. Adam Roosevelt, how do you read this yourself? Is it a moment of triumph and supremacy of law and the principle that everyone is equal before the law, no matter who you are? Or is the law here being politicized, something to pick up on what Mr. Marklow just said?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be among the esteemed guests. The first question is, what are we focusing on in terms of these continuous investigations? I think we can all agree as Americans that the rule of law is very important, but I'm also very interested in making sure we protect the Constitution and what we've built as the American people. So these 34 counts of the falsification of these business records, we obviously need to review what's been released in this unsealed package before the legal team is actually able to address and provide a defense argument to each of these particular counts. I do think that this is overly politicized from the aspect of the election conversation, because I do know that from a state perspective, it is within scope of conversation for election violations, but this was something that I would have anticipated from the federal level if they were going to take this particular investigation forward and accuse the former president. So I think there's some political elements and some questions regarding the business records that need to be reviewed more intensively.
And Mr. Adam Roosevelt, what's your observation on how the protests have been shaping up?
In terms of the protests, I think that, the president has a large group of supporters, me being one of them, but I'm also involved in looking at the National Republican Congressional Committee, the National Republican Senate Committee, and making sure that the alignment is in the defense of the best interests of the country. But from a political perspective, I think the protests are to support the president and making sure that he's given a fair trial in this process.
Very nice. And let me get back to you here, Mr. Marklow. What is your observation on what is happening here? Do you think that this is going to be beneficial for Donald Trump when it comes to the presidential campaign of 2024?
Well, let me, before that, just go back to something that Dr. Roosevelt mentioned, which is very, very important. Mm-hmm. And it is the fact that every effort must be made to ensure that former President Trump does receive a fair and just trial, that any actions against him are exactly the same as any actions against any other citizen would actually be. So this is very, very important. There are some who will argue that it is very politicized, others who will argue the contrary. What is important is for the justice system to prove that everything is fair and everything is anything but politicized. That said, I do remain of the opinion that Trump can make political capital out of this. I do firmly believe that a number of his supporters will view this as absolutely politicized, as a measure that has been taken forward to try and block any future political ambition, which, as we already know, is exactly what Donald Trump has for the next round of presidential elections. So I do actually think that, ironically, this could actually be very, very positive for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. And here, let me get back to you, Mr. Adam Roosevelt. How is this case playing out in the psyche of Americans?
There are different viewpoints, and one viewpoint would be the folks who believe that the Republican campaign, the Republican president, the Republican ideology is what they will stand by, they will effectively fall in line and state that this is a witch hunt, which is a term that has been consistently used in any investigation targeting President Trump. So I think that that's one perspective. And then on the Democratic side, I think there's different perspectives there, but the larger view is that they are getting their day in court. They are holding President Trump accountable for any actions that he may have committed prior to being president that may have been illegal, or even during the presidency. And we're seeing this all play out. And I think those two are very different perspectives, but they are pretty common in the American footprint view.
Very nice indeed. And here, let me bring up Mr. Dennis to the conversation here. Mr. Dennis Speed, how do you think this is going to affect Donald Trump's 2024 presidential campaign? As some experts say that these charges threaten to inject chaos in 2024 presidential campaign. And how are Republicans endorsing Trump amidst all of this?
Well, I actually think what will happen vis-a-vis the presidential campaign is that this will help Donald Trump immensely. But I also don't think that's what's actually going on. I think you're seeing, you have to embed what's happening here in the context of what has been an approximate 30-year unraveling of the presidency, starting with the presidency of Bill Clinton. It is various assaults on the presidency being made through the Department of Justice. What's really happening in the United States is that you're having a process of implosion of the institutions of the United States, because there are many different things that Donald Trump could have been indicted on. As the journalist Glenn Greenwald just pointed out a couple of days ago, this is about the worst indictment to have brought. It's 34 different counts, but each paragraph of the indictment is identical. In other words, it's just a bunch of checks, wires, and so on, and nothing is actually delineated in the indictment. It's a bare bones indictment. And various legal authorities are looking at this thing and saying, look, they should have told us they weren't going to say anything in the indictment, because people all over the world are trying to read it and figure it out. What's actually happening here is you're seeing the implosion of the American Republic. It's kind of like a feeding frenzy, and the party systems are disintegrating. That is what you're actually watching today occur in the United States. It's an historic day.
So it is not a case of bringing or making the law above everyone, no matter who you are, and it's not something that is being politicized?
No, it's precisely the opposite. It is making the law about a vendetta against a person who was president, but it's not about him. It's about the same thing that we've seen occur around, for example, the Nord Stream pipeline, where the United States clearly blew it up, but won't admit it. And what you've got is that the legislative branch won't hold the executive accountable. The executive branch is being destroyed by the judicial branch, and the judicial branch is held hostage, particularly to the banking system, where you've got all kinds of criminality that has been done by several bankers in the United States, including in the SVB bank case in California, and nobody would be prosecuted. You're seeing a general, universal implosion of the institutions of self-government in the United States, and this is just one part of that.
And Mr. Dennis here, I know that this is another key question that as to when are we expecting a final ruling in this case, but this is definitely going to take a while. I mean, of lawyers making motion, dismissing charges, finding new evidences and so on. But what's, according to you, the before and after scenario here? And how is this going to be similar to the Capitol incident on January 6th?
There's no real similarity to January 6th here. What's going on here is that the transatlantic banking system, and specifically the banking system in the United States, is melting down. The Ukraine war was a complete fiasco, and the United States lost the financial war with Russia. What has happened is that Janet Yellen has become, instead of being the head of the Federal Reserve, a political operative, going personally and giving billion-dollar checks to Zelensky. So what you're seeing is that the political class of the United States has lost its way. It can't react, it can't respond appropriately to the fact that Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, several other countries have decided they're de-dollarizing. The dollar will no longer be the basis of world credit because you can't trust the United States after they confiscated the $300+ billion of the Russians. And so what's happening is that there is a general failure on several fronts, and it's become conjunctural, by which I mean it's converging. And it converges around the figure of Donald Trump because he's a hated figure and he's a loved figure, but he's going to suck all the air out of the room as soon as you make him a focus. He is being created he's been used as a diversion for the fact that the United States political class doesn't have a clue what to do.
Very nice indeed. And Mr. Adam Roosevelt, what are your comments regarding this, that the whole trial is just a diversion, a show to divert the opinion of the local opinion in the United States, Mr. Adam Roosevelt?
Well, I think it's actually a fantastic macro view if you can consolidate all of the geopolitical issues happening, as was mentioned, from the BRICS conversation to the Russia-Iran conversation. For sure, the goal is to make sure you can change the viewpoint of who will be the next future president to handle these macro issues. And these issues are very damaging to the United States. So I think that you may want to target the next person who may be the loudest person in the room, which is President Donald Trump. So that could be, let's say, an adopted CIA strategy for those who are politically astute in terms of leveraging these particular techniques and tactics to forecast and also manipulate the influence of the future outcome of an election. But I would say that, yes, this is a part of a larger strategy, but I think that it doesn't play well at the end for the Democratic Party. And I don't think that the President Trump, will lose. I think he will win this particular matter. And right now we can see how he's polling. We can also see how his ability to raise funds is really increasing his favorability amongst the Republican Party. And I think they may even be able to pull over some Democrats or some moderate Democrats to start questioning where the direction of America is going, because we all are about rule of law, but we also want to make sure we have stability in the country.
And Adam Roosevelt, former President Donald Trump, will be addressing supporters at his Mar-a-Lago estate tonight. And like the courtroom, he's expected to say whatever he wants now. Do you think that he'll galvanize his supporters regarding this affair?
Well, I can tell you that President Trump is one factor to consider. I have advised and worked with the National Republican Senate Committee. There's the RNC. There's also the NRCC, which is the National Republican Congressional Committee. These components, these bodies, are very strong arms and legs of how the president has his ability to be effective from a resource perspective, from a voice perspective, from a platform perspective. So Mar-a-Lago will be a headquarters, but those particular arms and legs will also provide strategic resources and a consolidated viewpoint on what the Republican Party will say and do collectively as one body to move with unity to make sure they maximize effectiveness across all messaging, all engagements, and then leading up to the presidential election in 2024.
And let me here invite Mr. Mark Lowe perhaps to comment on what has been stated already.
Well, very, very interesting to take the overall geopolitical situation into consideration. Very, very important to take America's role on the world stage into consideration, and specifically to try and scan the horizon and understand how many more changes will occur in the short term. There is, without a shadow of doubt, a certain amount of disillusion with what the United States was and what the United States has become in terms of a world power. We are seeing, as the other guest pointed out, some very, very radical changes. A lot of countries, for example, Saudi Arabia, and we only have to take a look at the OPEC being absolutely driven by Saudi Arabia. We only have to take a look at the decisions made over the weekend in terms of reducing oil output to understand that the world is changing. We are looking a new world order in the face. Things are changing very, very rapidly. Alliances are either falling to pieces or new alliances are being created in all of this. Where is the United States in terms of current policy and future policy? So there is absolutely a direct connection between who the next president of the United States of America will be, and not only America's role on the global stage, but possibly more importantly, the rest of the world's perception of the American role.
Mm-hmm. And here, Mr. Mr. Dennis Speed, can you put us in the picture here as what is happening in general in the United States, and how are the geopolitical changes in the world affecting what's happening inside?
Think about it this way. What they are seeing is various forms of economic crisis, financial crisis, which are beginning to hit. Of course, the banking crisis is still evolving. And every time that the president says, don't worry, then people begin to worry. That's obviously because if you take something like the Credit Suisse matter, it's very related to the SVB bank matter because it's one system, and that's part of it. But the way they're experiencing this is, for example, we're about to see 15 million people taken off Medicaid. Those are the poorest people in the country. It means that they won't have any medical coverage, or they won't be subsidized. Mm-hmm. Then there's, of course, what's happening at the gas pump, and that's another kind of thing. Then there's the inflation, which mm-hmm. seems to correlate in some fashion, not with what Putin did, but what was happening actually just not just at the gas pump, but what's happening with food prices. You can't blame mm-hmm. the food price increase on Vladimir Putin. So Americans are very concerned about the nature of the economic crisis. And in addition, a lot of Americans would like to go back to the time when America was a productive economy, when it actually did manufacturing, it did mining, it had a much more extensive owner-operated agricultural sector. Mm-hmm. I think this is really what's actually on people's minds. Now, it doesn't mean they don't think about international matters, but I will put it this way to you. Mm-hmm. I think that the American people are going to be shocked into recognition that the Ukraine matter was a failure. Mm-hmm. And it was a failure that came right off Afghanistan. They mm-hmm. sort of ran right into another war, and within a year, you have a situation where over $100 billion is given for that war. But also note something. Just a few days ago, the Union Bank of Switzerland, which bought Credit Suisse, was also guaranteed $108 billion by the Swiss National Bank. Mm-hmm. And people say, where's this money? Who runs this money? Who runs this power? And so what has happened for the American people is, as they see an indictment like this, which doesn't have any real much substance to it and much explanation, they are caused to think something completely else is going on here. Will someone please explain it to us? Mm-hmm. I think we could even see a renaissance, a near renaissance in the thinking process of Americans, a kind of upheaval that might actually hopefully propel new independent forces into the political fight in the next months.
Very nice. And as here we're watching live, Donald Trump arrived at Mar-a-Lago Estate, where he'll be delivering a speech to his supporters. Here, let me ask you, Mr. Adam Roosevelt, what kind of change is Donald Trump promising to Americans here that is different from what is happening, the war in Ukraine and the inflation at home? Do you think that he will bring that kind of change that the Americans are aspiring for?
I do. In fact, I think he has been one of the most controversial leaders to date, and that's primarily because of his engagement strategy on a number of different topics: foreign affairs, how he handled the engagement with Iran, how his position was very strong on how he was engaging the Taliban, his relationship with the Middle East, the border security strategy. So I was privileged to serve in the Homeland Security side. I was privileged to serve in the Department of Defense on the front lines of Afghanistan. So I was very close to these particular matters because I understand that there's a large block of people who are patriots who have put themselves in harm's way. And that essentially is the foundation of the patriotism that serves the country. People fight for that. They believe in that. And I think he's speaking very simply to a lot of people. And he did deliver on his campaign promises in this last election. This new phase will be about election reform and integrity, foreign policy, getting our foreign policy back in place and making America a respected nation in the Middle East, reestablishing those ties, reining in OPEC, making sure Iran is held accountable. These are the things that I think we're going to hear, but our domestic policy will be the first priority from the White House if President Donald Trump is able to regain the reins. But we're going to have a major topic focus on domestic and foreign policy across those issue areas.
And just to shed some light on the foreign policy that might the U.S. actually witness here, let me bring Mr. Marklow. Mr. Marklow, can you tell us what kind of changes are we bracing for if Donald Trump is elected again as the President of the United States?
Further disturbance, further instability, more changes, and a greater distancing from the United States on the part of a number of nations, be they Asian
Mr.
nations.
Marklow, excuse me to cut you right there. Actually, we just want to go live to what Donald Trump is saying right now to his supporters, and then we go back to discussion.